The Age of Empires franchise is undoubtedly enjoying the best period in its illustrious history. Across its various entries, the franchise has experienced a revival that has captured both longtime fans and new players alike. Yet, its current state also beckons important questions. This resurgence is evident in player numbers, DLCs released, and tournaments organized, but to explore what's next, the potential for Age of Empires 5, we have to take a closer look within. So why exactly would Age of Empires 5 come sooner than we originally thought? Welcome back to Age of Noob, folks. It's been a while. What prompted me to talk about this topic actually stemmed from something related to the video game my team and I are developing, There Be Istanbul. And this video, at its core really, is about Age of Empires 4, and I'll get to how all of this is tied in a moment. Of course, we'd very much so appreciate your support if you visited our linked Steam page below and added the game to your wishlist if it piques your interest. Thank you. Okay, before I get to why any of this is even relevant, let's look at how things are today. Looking at the franchise from a Steam perspective, the least active game is AoE 1. It averages a little over 1,000 players, a small but surprisingly persistent community, for this DE entry especially. By and large though, AoE 1 has been abandoned for a long time now. Age of Mythology, which received its remake last in the franchise, has higher player numbers of course, usually around 4,000 to 5,000, fluctuating with DLC releases and seasonal activity. Notably, it is still below Age of Empires 3, which maintains a slightly higher average player base, but has also seen its support pull back, as evident with its cancelled DLC. Age of Empires 4 generally sits between 8,000 and 10,000 players, depending on the time of the year. It remains healthy, and the player base is roughly half that of Age of Empires 2, which dominates the franchise with averages between 15,000 and 20,000 on Steam. Of course, there are different platforms and storefronts with more players than the numbers you see, but it should be safe to assume that the distribution of players would also follow proportionally on those platforms as well. Hence, these numbers highlight a rather clear hierarchy. Okay, so with that in mind, what exactly prompted me to think about AoE 4 and 5? I promise this won't take long, so bear with me. We, at Upper Studios, are developing a 2D beat-em-up, and therefore, we have to animate our characters in 2D. I had to make the choice at the start between the two primary approaches we could have taken. We either could do skeletal animation or do frame by frame. Skeletal animation is exactly as it sounds. You rig the character's body parts and animate them accordingly. This allows great flexibility because you animate each rough body part separately, which makes swapping assets or using them across multiple characters very straightforward. Frame by frame means that we have to hand draw every single frame from scratch by hand. It's a brutal process that requires the right talent to pull off. So why bother? Well, talented artists can really make those animations look special and add that bit of flair and character to the game. Okay, I'll circle back as to why any of this was relevant at the end. So, going back to the franchise, the hierarchy I just outlined also is reflected in Microsoft's approach to DLCs. Namely, Age of Empires 2 has had 9 DLCs over slightly more than 5 years, averaging roughly 2 per year. Each expansion introduced new civilizations, campaigns, or both, gradually expanding the game to over 50 civilizations. Yes, there have been a few misses, but most DLCs were received positively. By contrast, Age of Empires 4 has had only 3 paid DLCs over roughly 4 years, with only the first one, the Sultan's Ascend that I covered, receiving positive reviews. So normalized to the same time period, Age of Empires 4 has had 3 to 4 times fewer DLC releases. The other two currently hover around 60% on Steam due to significantly less content and the absence of campaigns. Despite the latter two costing the same or more than Sultan's Ascend, the much smaller scopes led to dissatisfaction in the AoE4 community, at least in parts. So what gives? The truth lies in the cost of making new content for those two games. The contrast in dev efforts between 2 and 4 is stark. I'll give just one example to make a point. In Age of Empires 2, each civilization requires a limited set of voice lines and voice actors. A male villager, a female villager, a male military unit, a male king, and an old man for monks. That's it. It really is just those 5. Cavalry units all share the same non-human sounds, and the same applies to siege, ships, and so on. Hence, each AoE 2 civ has a total of 60 to 70 voice lines, and if you play them back to back, they're about 1 to 1.5 minutes of recording, meaning that across 50 civilizations, the total voice line should be roughly an hour long. On the other hand, this is what it looks like for Age of Empires 4, also roughly 60 minutes. For one civilization of one age and one line variant. Each voice line has 3 to 5 variants, and each of the 4 ages has its own set of lines. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, let's take an example. The Abbasid villager. This villager, of course, has male and female lines. The villager has 5 different voice lines per age, and every one of them has 6 different variants. The first 4 are different intensities, and the latter 2 are whispers for stealth forests. Now, let's multiply that for each of the dark, feudal, castle, and imperial ages, since they're all different. Okay, now I multiply that again for group voice line variants. As in AoE 4, voice lines change based on whether you've selected a single unit or a group of them. Now imagine these variants being multiplied for each action. For example, in AoE 2, there are only 2 voice lines for, say, farming. One farming line for male and one for female. In Age of Empires 4, roughly 90. So things like attack moving, stopping, standing ground, every single one of them has multiples of those voice lines. So not only are the number of variant magnitudes higher, but the number of actions are as well. To put salt on the wound, every military unit not only has unique voice lines, but also unique voice actors, and they also have many miscellaneous lines such as spotting an enemy or celebrating a win. The Ottoman Janissary, for example, has over 400 voice lines. The French Knight? I counted over 1,000. I can go on, but I think I've made my point. Let's go back to the graph. This is all of AoE 2's voice lines for all of its 50 plus civilizations. This is my estimate of the average per civ in AoE 4, and this is my estimate for all voice lines in AoE 4. Per civilization, it comes to about 800 times the effort. Let's be conservative and say that I miscounted and my estimates are off by a huge margin of error, like 30 or 40%. That's still 500 times the effort. And mind you, they have to research the history behind those voice lines to ensure they're age and era accurate. So it's not just more voice lines and more voice actors, it's also more work writing them with research, linguistic accuracy, and historical adaptation. And folks, this is just voice lines for heaven's sake. The same rigor applies to visuals. For example, AoE 2 has the same male and female villagers across the board. AoE 4, villagers are not only unique per civilization, but also unique per age within each civilization. No matter how you cut it. All praise to the men and women who have achieved an incredible level of detail in Age of Empires 4. But this achievement, this incredibly high standard, comes at too large of a cost. To go back to the original analogy with my game that prompted me to look into the development cost of Age of Empires 4 in the first place, the frame-by-frame animation that I decided on also comes at an enormous cost. But it allows us to be incredibly expressive and original with our animations, a true work of art. This means that I had to cut out, without exaggeration, 95% of plant cosmetics, because it meant that we had to redraw every single frame for every single animation, from scratch, for each cosmetic. I made this decision primarily due to 2 reasons. 1, animations are front and center. It has perhaps the largest impact on gameplay feel and perceived quality by our potential players. And 2, I have no plans for further development once the game is out. It's a narrative experience that you play through and enjoy, but there is no further story to tell or DLCs to release. Age of Empires 4, on the other hand, kinda shot itself in the foot. It simply didn't account for the future content that it had to develop post-launch. Not for its civilizations, and certainly not for the campaigns. Since we have established that full civilizations are prohibitively expensive due to their original design choices, Microsoft now relies on variant civilizations, which probably still require similar or more effort to an AoE2 civ. But to the public, to the players, they are still seen as secondary or lightweight content. Labeling those DLC efforts as such is frankly unfair to the devs, but the genie's out of the bottle already, as they've set the standard too high. Campaign development faces similar constraints, as the ambitious documentary-style ones will never return due to their incredible cost, which further contributes to the uneven quality amongst content released. Folks, make no mistake, despite these challenges, AoE 4 remains a remarkable game with a healthy player base and plenty of life still. But if we do pay attention, dev cycles for DLCs are way too long, and those that do get released aren't even being received well because they're limited to variant civilizations and no new campaigns. AoE 2, by contrast, remains resilient with frequent DLCs and a very robust tournament scene. But even AoE 2 faces eventual constraints. Over 50 civilizations already exist today, and yes, there's still room for more DLCs for sure, but is it not naive to think that our aging player base will eventually stop buying the DLCs at some point? Can Microsoft really rely on milking AoE 2 forever? 70 civs? 100? I couldn't tell you what the point of saturation is, but I'd like to believe that it's not too far away. Which brings us to Age of Empires 5. Lessons from AoE 4's ambitious but costly game design could inform a new entry with a better balance between immersion, detail, and perhaps critically, scalability. Somehow, Age of Empires 5 has to strike that perfect balance to allow more frequent and affordable DLCs, campaigns, and civilizations to sustain engagement, just like AoE 2, but without the prohibitive costs that Age of Empires 4 unfortunately suffers from. So, to summarize, the AoE franchise is strong but segmented. Age of Empires 1 and 3 are effectively retired, and Age of Mythology will likely face the same music soon. AoE 4 is healthy today, but shot itself in the foot with its excessively detailed game design, and so it's going to struggle with churning out DLCs. And AoE 2 continues to be the financial and community cornerstone, but for how much longer can they really milk this cash cow? Given that AoE 4 cannot carry the mantle for the future of the franchise, and AoE 2 running the risk of saturation and potentially having already reached its peak player counts, World's Edge may begin to look into Age of Empires 5 much sooner than we think to secure the franchise's future. But what do you think, folks? I'd love to hear your opinions. Do you think that my assessment of the franchise is wrong? Do you think that a new age should be upon us?